Always good to have you back on. And boy, that's one of the things with these annual meetings is they sure give us a lot of fodder to work with, don't they?
Yeah, and curiously, people probably don't know this, but the World Economic Forum did a report in 2006 called Global Risk, and two of the global risks that they cited was global oil price shock and pandemic. But by 2020, they'd moved those completely off the list and replaced it all with climate change. So you have to wonder if people have actually manipulated the situation so they're cashing in on it right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of interests in there. I mean, it's hard to explain and discuss what that group is. It's the world's elites. They're gathered. They're business elites. They're political elites. And I had a bunch of people get upset over a tweet where I pointed out that they want centralized government, but with socialism. They say it's not socialism. There's going to be a bunch of rich people up top. Well, actually, if you look at most examples of socialism, that is how it works out, despite what they say. So I think it's a classic thing. But so the environment has been a big theme, this year. I mean, what I found crazy is a lot of them are talking, of course, they're still talking about strangling oil and gas while everybody's in the midst of an energy crisis.
Yeah, it's ludicrous. There was what is it, Christiane, what's her name? I sent it to you the other day.
Norway or?
Yeah, the woman from Norway. She was saying that, there it is, Norwegian finance CEO Kirsten Breithen was saying that the energy transition will create energy shortages and inflationary pressures, but the pain is worth it. I don't think you can find anybody out there who's enjoying paying all the extra prices, and especially in the UK and Europe, where power prices and heating prices are just going through the roof, and it's also causing food shortages. Not just the war, just the fact that natural gas prices have skyrocketed means a lot of food processing can't be done because, ironically, there's carbon dioxide as a byproduct, which is used for food processing. And a lot of the natural gas processors just can't operate anymore. It's not profitable. So, what pain is worth that? And in fact, as I was just pointing out to someone earlier, so far we haven't seen one wind turbine or one solar panel produced by wind or solar power. Until that happens, we better not rely on that as our future.
Yeah, and in saying that the pain is worth it, I see that as almost a vulgarity. It's easy for them to say, again, when you're elite, you're not dealing with figuring out how to pay your rent. You're actually globetrotting, staying in luxury hotels to tell everyone else to tighten their belt. It brings to mind David Suzuki with his multiple houses, going around telling everybody else that the pain is worth it to shut everything else down. The hypocrisy is galling. And I know most people see through it, but they got to understand that these are people who influence our world leaders.
Yeah, they're tremendously influential. And, I don't think that people actually know, but Clintel, the climate intelligence group out of the Netherlands, which has over 1,000 signatories who say there's no climate emergency, and they're all scientists and scholars. They sent a letter to the Swiss government asking them, how could the World Economic Forum have been granted host state status? So this is like giving them status equivalent to, say, the Red Cross, as if they're doing something great for the world. How could they have been granted status when they were the people who gave Greta Thunberg a stage to make her scary monologue to the world? I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And yet, in April 2021, when she testified to the US Congress, she said, "Oh, I don't literally want anyone to panic. That's just a metaphor." Well, so this group of influential business people who are all engaged in carbon markets and renewables and want to go green and climate initiatives use this young woman to scare millions of children and people around the world. And yet in their own mission statement, they claim that moral and intellectual integrity is at the heart of everything the WEF does. And we are an organization accountable to all parts of society. Well, let's see some accountability. Let's see some accountability for the tweets that they were putting out during lockdown saying, lockdowns are improving the world. They had this little video, I don't know if people remember, where they had like a single individual on a skateboarding through this gutted, empty city. And they said, "Oh, lockdowns are improving the world." Well, you know, so this group of influential business people who are all engaged in carbon markets and renewables and want to go green and climate initiatives use this young woman to scare millions of children and people around the world. And yet in their own mission statement, they claim that moral and intellectual integrity is at the heart of everything the WEF does. And we are an organization accountable to all parts of society. Well, let's see some accountability. Let's see some accountability for the tweets that they were putting out during lockdown saying, lockdowns are improving the world. like people were committing suicide. Businesses were going bankrupt. People were losing their houses. Fentanyl overdoses were over the top. And this group of elites think that lockdowns are improving cities, and they want to do more lockdowns. They have another tweet out there. They want to do more. And so, they're a very dangerous group of people. And because they're transnational, they're unelected, they're unaccountable, how do you do anything to them, especially when they have this diplomatic immunity in Switzerland?
Yeah, and I mean, it was just gross, that picture, as you were speaking of, that image of the empty freeways and such, and trying to say this is a good thing. This is something to aspire to. We want to become some sort of impoverished, introverted society where everybody's locked in their homes, living in poverty, because that'll theoretically, and there's the big theory, save Mother Earth. This is the only, if anything, it should backfire. It should make people realize this is how bad it would have to get before we even started to reduce to get towards those crazy climate targets that are always set for us.
Yeah, well, it's very dangerous ideology. You have to remember also there was a report that came out in the fall of 2019 called Exponential Roadmap. And this was done by very influential ENGOs like World Wild Fund and a whole assortment of these guys. But they wanted to cut emissions in half by 2030. And most of the things that they proposed actually were met by lockdowns. So I find that a very suspicious connection. Call me a conspiracy theorist. I don't care. Read the report yourself, Exponential Roadmap, and you'll see that the things they proposed were things like everyone work from home, no going to doctor's meetings, no going to school, because this cuts transportation emissions. And of course, for the billionaires associated with World Economic Forum, most of them in high tech, this was fantastic for them. They capitalized on it. They made bank while other people suffered. And especially things like fintech, which, financial technical startups, they'd been kind of a nothing business for 5 years or something, just laying there in the corner, not really doing anything. Boom, lockdown. I think their stocks went up like 300%. So, and all these WEF billionaires were early investors, just waiting for the opportunity for this to take off. So, and people can read a lot more about these guys. There's the Fourth Industrial Revolution. That's one book. And the Davos Man, which is a new one. I haven't gone through this yet, but I started it, and it's the same shocking stuff about these elites, as you say, people who they really don't care about you and me. We're just useless eaters.
Yeah, well, that's about it. And I mean, something I think that's good, though, I mean, because the World Economic Forum has been around a long, long time. They've been holding these meetings for a long time, and nobody's really paid much attention to them or realized the amount of influence they have. And now that the world is kind of paying attention, the commoners, us unwashed, and realizing what the agenda of at least the people leading it. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions too. People seem to think just because somebody attended it doesn't mean they've embraced every aspect of what the leaders were saying at their speeches or things like that. But I mean, they don't hide their agenda whatsoever, the organization itself or Mr. Schwab. I mean, it's been in the open for quite some time, and people are suddenly realizing that.
Mm-hmm, yes. Well, we have about 3 or 4 different videos. One is called The Great Reset, in their own words, a Ponzi scheme. These are all on our YouTube channel. We were also very concerned after the Davos 2020 meeting because of the depopulation talk there. They featured Jane Goodall, who was saying, we wouldn't have any climate change problems if the population of the Earth was only 500 million. So you can take your own assumptions from that. And unfortunately, in the world of climate change, people have been using this RCP 8.5. I actually have the chart there. People have been referring to this set of scenarios, and the catastrophic claims come from using this scenario, which is deemed to be implausible. But these other scenarios have 3 billion fewer people in them. So in one that we did with Clintel, where they sent a message to the World Economic Forum on climate change, we tried to make that clear that, hopefully no one has decided, wow, there's a climate emergency, let's get rid of 3 billion people. But you can see how, devious minds might come up with that. And I mean, the unintended consequences of lockdown will be hundreds of thousands, millions of people who die prematurely, who suffer in great pain. And we have already seen that many people took their lives. So that is a depopulation program right there.
Well, and whether it's intentional or not intentional, I imagine for some of the crazed ideologues, and they exist, there's an anti-humanity type of ideologue out there, and a lot of them are in the environmental circles. They think that anything humans do is evil, and we should just basically get rid of people. They're self-loathing. It's a real problem. As far as I'm concerned, they need help, but they get into positions of influence. But now the other thing we're looking at is and again, not all of them necessarily are supporting it, but we've got a world food supply crisis coming down the pipe. And it's funny because we were warning, you and I were on the show talking about the energy crisis back last summer, saying, hey, Europe is up the creek. They're in big trouble. We got problems coming. And it wasn't heeded. And now, due to with the Russia-Ukraine conflict on top of that, it's just become all the more acute. But now we can see it. Anybody looking at economics, anybody looking at supply chains, anybody looking at the regions where the war is, we got a really big food crisis coming. And they're not talking about that at the World Economic Forum. They're worried about reducing our carbon footprint.
Right. And, they're definitely not interested in helping people, say, in Egypt and Africa, where they get most of their wheat from the Ukraine. So, that material can't be shipped now. It's locked in port at the moment. And I just saw a video about it. And, that we're not talking about part of their food coming from there. We're talking about like 80% to some of these countries. And without that, people will die en masse. And the video I just saw was also talking about how in 2007, 2008, there was the Arab Spring, and most people said, oh, that's, because Egypt wants to be democratic. Well, it's because that part of the world was suffering food shortages and food price hikes. And there's a group of people called New England Complex Systems Institute, and they did a study showing that as food prices rise, civil unrest rises, and they could actually predict where in the world the next civil unrest would be based on their complex system analysis.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at Somalia or anywhere in North Africa, and I can't presume on your date of birth by any means, but I'm old enough to remember the famines of the 80s and the early 90s. It was terrible.
Oh, yeah.
North Africa was in Ethiopia. It was awful to see what was happening. And the reason we don't see it today is good modern. I mean, it didn't suddenly turn into good growing areas in Ethiopia and Somalia, and the populations didn't go down. But due to modern energy, modern transportation and supply chains, as you said, we've been able to bring in wheat and products from Ukraine and such down there to feed people. And that's not going to be coming down this year. We're going to see some serious problems.
Yeah, it's catastrophic. It's criminal. And as you say, these guys at the World Economic Forum, that should be, if they are in fact accountable to all parts of society, if they are in fact doing things with morality and integrity at the center of everything they do, then this should be the first thing on their agenda. And it might even be a climate war between Ukraine and Russia, despite the other things that have been said. But the World Economic Forum wants a global price on carbon by 2030. And Russia has never, ever bought into that ideology of climate change. We have on our website their rebuttal to the Kyoto Protocol from 2004, and they called climate change ideology a threat to human civilization. And I guess we're seeing that right now.
Absolutely. And I mean, Russia didn't take the BS, and that's part of why they became an energy powerhouse, because they weren't shackling themselves and they could provide product in volumes that the world demanded. And then suddenly, we're beholden to them. And something else that was interesting, listening to them talk about their great transition. And I heard a speech, I can't remember who was talking about it, but we're going to need cobalt and we're going to need lithium. And they said Canada might be one. Well, even if you go that way, now you're still going to have some small single source areas that you're reliant on for your energy and you're going to be vulnerable to energy crisis if there's any disruptions.
Yeah, yeah, you have to have a mix. And actually, there's fairly substantial evidence that Russia was funding most of the environmental groups to get Germany to not keep their nuclear plants online, to not keep their coal plants open, to continue to buy Russian oil and gas. And and sadly, I think Samuel Farfari, who's a professor emeritus of Belgian University, um, and an energy director general for the EU for 36 years. He wrote quite a thoughtful article about how the war could have been prevented simply by making a proper energy deal with the EU and Russia and Ukraine, and solve it in a financial, economic, negotiated, contractual way. Because it makes the most sense, actually, for Russian oil and gas to feed Europe. Otherwise, Europe has to bring everything by boat, which is way more energy intensive. The prices are much higher. And, and then you're creating an enemy by not buying their product, if you get my meaning.
Yeah, and then meanwhile here in Canada, we have Trudeau. This is kind of throwing out of left field, but I imagine you've probably seen it and thought about it. They're looking to tax fertilizer now. They're actually looking to treat fertilizer as because they feel that it contributes to climate change, and start taxing it to reduce the use of it, which of course will reduce the amount of food when we're moving towards a world food crisis. This is the insanity of the ideology that's being pushed right now.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of people in the green movement who are very eager to go back to sort of organic farming. And this is a project that's happening in Europe right now. It's called the Food to Fork program. And this is including these things like reducing chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides, herbicides, and, going back to having cattle fertilize your field, which they do anyway. They'll just go out there and poop all over the place, and that's great. And their hooves dig up the ground, and you can see marine pools film about that. Return to Eden, that's on our website too. But you can't create mass food production with like my grandpa did, with a cowl around his neck, a yoked to an oxen. You can't do that. Like many millions more people will die. So we can't go back to that. And actually, there's lots of evidence showing that livestock doesn't create GHGs, that agricultural methods of today, the farmers are way smarter and far ahead of all these crazy environmentalists. And, it's just insane that the government is listening to ideologues and not the real people who do the real work. People are going to suffer and die.
I know, and I'm afraid it's going to be a cold comfort of being able to say, I told you so, 8-9 months from now, when we see starvation really starting to come into play in vulnerable areas such as Northern Africa, or you're one drought away from it in some South American countries or places all over. And if they were listening, as you said, if the World Economic Forum was an international group of elites who want to actually better the world, this should be the front and center subject of today. I'm sure economists have been asking for it. I'm sure agricultural experts have been pointing it out, supply chain experts, but they aren't talking about it. And that's really disturbing. And that really kind of exposes them for what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Green grifters, all of them. Yep.
Well, we'll watch and see. As I said, the one little upside is, hey, people are paying attention to them more than they ever have before. And people are realizing it, like so many of the other conspiracy theories out there, well, they weren't actually so much a conspiracy once the facts came out. So I think, kind of like a vampire, that shining a light on it and exposing it is going to be what takes their power away. And we're working towards that. But unfortunately, I think that these ideologues in the world stage are going to cause a lot of suffering and damage before we can finally get them under control.
Yeah, well, and they all own big tech. This is the real problem. And they own a lot of the media. After Greta made her appearance there, Mark Bainoff of Salesforce, who's part of the World Economic Forum, he put her on the cover of Time. He owns Time, so, and Mark Carney, he's a trustee there. And what did Mark do? He told companies that if you don't get on the climate change bandwagon, you'll go bankrupt. So, you know, these people are just shooting their mouth off all over the place and making a mess of the world. And we can't really do a lot about it because they're not elected, they're not accountable, and they're transnational. So send your letters to the Swiss government like Clintel did. You can see that letter on our website, on our blog.
Great. Now, actually, since you brought it up, and to close it out, I appreciate you coming on to talk to us. It's always great when we have you on. Where can we find more information about Friends of Science and yourself, and where you're documenting all this? Because your site's a great resource. I mean, it's if you want to drill down and find a lot of stuff, it's there.
Thank you. Well, you can look at www.friendsofscience.org. We're now going into our 20th year of operation. We're a nonprofit run by volunteers, and we just love it if people would help us with our campaign. Going into our 20th year, we're asking our followers if they'd donate maybe $20 for our 20 years. You can donate more, but you can just send it by e-transfer to contact@friendsofscience.org. And we've got, you know, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, of course. So look and see what we've got, and we welcome any comments.
Great. Well, thanks again, Michelle. Always good talking to you, and I hope we can talk again sometime soon.
Thank you, Corey.